Welcome to the first episode of my new series, JessTalks. A part of the show where I come out and I talk. I talk about anything and everything. Today I'm going to be discussing daycares and primarily why you shouldn't put your child in one. Now, before we get started, I do want to give a little bit of a history, a background of where I'm coming from all of this and on this opinion of mine. I was raised homeschooled 100%. My mom was my teacher. My father was my principal. And I was my whole life, all the way through high school. And then I worked a year and a half in a daycare. And I did 2 years worth of schooling that I had to do for daycare. I was a lot of classes that had to do with early childhood development. And though I do not work with it at a daycare now, I still work with children to this day. So I've been working with children professionally for about 4 years, though I have been around children since I was really, really little. So that's where I'm coming from when I discuss this. Today's topic being about daycares is stuff that I personally witnessed or saw or felt or learned in the year and a half that I worked at one and the 2 years of classes that I had to do to stay certified as a daycare worker in the state. So the first point I want to talk about is the physical health and codes and everything that had to do there. I worked at that daycare, again, for a long time, not that long I guess, but I did work at that daycare, and every week I was coming home with a new set of colds or bugs or symptoms or whatever, and it did not matter what I did health-wise, it just happened. Daycares are 100% one of the worst places ever when it comes to germs. Say emergency rooms and daycares. Number two, they're the two places that you are going to get sick. They are infested with germs. The weird thing about the daycares is that you can find childhood diseases at them that you will never see anywhere else. I brought home hand, foot, mouth disease. You do not get that anywhere other than at a daycare. Same thing, measles, chicken pox. I guess technically you can get the chicken pox at other places, but more likely you're going to get them if you're at a daycare. Along with any other colds, bugs, flus, whatever you would have it. You might ask, why? Why is it that daycares are so gross? So gross. Again, only speaking from my personal experience, but at my daycare, we would have at max, and majority of the time, we would have 12 kids, either 2 or older, depending on which room it was and what kind of a teacher you were being. If they were 2 or older, you would have 12 kids in your room at any given point, max. That was the top limit. So you imagine putting 12 toddlers in a room. It's not a pretty sight. Anyone who has kids knows, especially toddlers, know that they will stick their mouths on everything. They'll stick their hands in everything and put it in their mouths. They will lick anything and everything. They're curious. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know better. They're just trying to learn and everything, which is great when you're trying to teach them and keep them clean. But they will. And you put 12 of them in one room, that's what they're going to do. They're going to stick it in their mouths. They're going to lick and touch all sorts of things. Bathrooms. I was in a 3-year-old room for a good chunk of that time there. Primarily, I was in the 1-year-old or the 3-year-old room when I was working at the daycare. And at the 3-year-old room, they're potty training. Yeah, that's not a clean thing to do with one kid, much less 12. 12 of them all at once doing that, not the greatest. And then they go with other health things that you can think of. More often than not, if a child was sick, they still got sent to the daycare. It didn't matter. The parents would still send them to the daycare, getting everyone else sick, including the staff. When you try to think of taking them outside to get fresh air, half the time we couldn't. If the weather was bad enough, we couldn't take them outside. It was just, you can't take a bunch of 12-year-olds out in the rain or the snow. And during the summer months, it was either too hot, get your kid a heat stroke, or it was too smoky. And you can't take a bunch of 2-year-olds out for that either. So we want to be able to do that. Yes, we would try to keep the facilities clean and sanitize and everything, but there's only so much we could do. If they weren't able to stop a kid from sticking their hand in their mouth after touching something they really shouldn't have touched. staying in the realm of health and everything, is food. You don't know what your child is eating at the daycare. I can guarantee you 100% on that. You can pack your own food for the daycare. You can send lunches and snacks with them. And yeah, we'll feed them that, of course. Obviously, we're not going to starve your children. But again, anyone who has a toddler 100% knows that they will pick anything up off the floor and stick it in their mouths. It does not matter if it's gross old food or someone else's food. They're going to eat it. They're going to do it, okay? They're toddlers. That's what they do. Even the 3-year-olds would do this more often than not if they saw something sweet or something that they knew was candy or a dessert of some sort. It would go in the mouth, whether or not it was on the floor or not, did not matter. It happened a lot. But then on the flip side too, us teachers, we would have holiday parties or special events. It'd be someone's birthday, something along that line. We're going to feed your kids cookies, cake. When I was in the 1-year-old room, there would be times where the kids were so chaotic, so much bouncing off the walls and everything. The only way we could get control or anything of the room was to feed them crackers or other snacks that we kept stashed for those exact reasons. And more often than not, that type of snacks weren't necessarily told to the parents. We more often than not, we actually just kind of forgot. But the point is that the toddlers, they were not necessarily always eating the food that you packed. And more often than not, about half the time the food that was packed, only half of it ever got eaten, especially when it came to more healthier foods. The kid's not going to eat it when their partner on the other side of the table is eating a ding dong or a Twinkie or something. It's just not going to happen. So that's point one. My first point is they are not a healthy place. Physically, they are so bad for you. So incredibly bad. I would just bring home every week. And I kept track of it too. I wrote it on my calendar at the time and I was like, this week I'm healthy, this week I'm sick. This week I'm healthy, this week I'm sick. And every week I would come home with a new cold or a bug or disease or, whatever it would be. They're not a healthy place in any way, shape, or form physically. Mentally, exact same thing, which I believe is my second point. It is. Okay. My second point on this is mental health. Your child is being put in the daycare at such a young age. At such a young age, hold on that thought one moment. They are stuck in a daycare more often than not longer than us staff were there. Half the time I would come in and half the kids in my classes were already in, and then most of them would still be in that classroom by the time I left, and I worked 8-hour shifts. Your child, more often than not, is sitting at a daycare, good chunk of them, more than 10 hours. Day in, day out, Monday through Friday. That's not healthy for a kid, especially if the weather's bad and we can't take them outside. Especially if they are sick and not feeling good and they just get sent there anyways. It is not healthy in general. And most of these kids, they were babies. They were 2-year-olds or 1-year-olds that were getting stuck in these places for hours on end, Monday through Friday. Again, about 10 hours for a good chunk of them. They're missing out on literally anything and everything that would constitute as a childhood. Sure, we don't necessarily do proper classes or anything in a 1-year-old room or in the infant room or anything, but I can guarantee you that their lives in a 1-year-old room was very different than me and my siblings' lives when we were being raised at our house. It was different. We were able to go out and play. We were able to play with toys and do things that with our siblings and our parents. We were able to live and learn that way. I'm going to start talking about homeschooling here. I was going to save that for another episode. I do plan to do another full-on episode on homeschooling. We'll get there. That will be a thing. That will be a part 2. With the mental health and everything, kids who raise up in a daycare are more likely to have an unsuccessful marriage when they are adults. You can say that a lot for public school system as well, but specifically if they went to a daycare when they were a child, they are more likely to have a divorce later in life. Why is that? It's because at that young of an age, they're already being taught about divorce. In the 1-year-old room, as soon as they were 12, they would get put in the 2-year-old room, the 2-year-old room, because they would be too big and too old to be in the 1-year-old room. If they were attached to a teacher, if they were attached to a set of classmates or friends that they had in that daycare, they were immediately ripped away and weren't allowed to see them again because they were on a completely other side of the building. At such a young age, they have to experience this separation, this divorce, first from their parents when they first get enrolled in a daycare, and then secondly by their teachers and by their classmates when they move from class to class. They build an attachment. They spend a year getting to know this authority figure and this child, their classmates and everything that they are working with, that they grow and learn and are raised with, and then in a year's time, immediately they'd be snapped away into another classroom where they don't know anybody. They don't know the teacher. They don't know that person. It's a complete stranger. This one kid, when he turned 1, he had the hardest time ever in my time staying there, swapping classrooms to the 2-year-old room. It was very hard for everybody who was involved. He was very attached to my co-teacher at the time. She was his teacher basically. And she stayed in the 1-year-old room and he got moved to the 2-year-old room, and it was really hard on him. And speaking on that, just because for whatever reason you live 165 days automatically means apparently that you're old enough to move on to another classroom, even if you're not. That poor kid who had such a hard time adjusting was because the instant he turned 1 did not mean mentally he turned 1. He didn't. I mean 2. I'm so sorry. I meant 2. When he physically turned 2, he did not immediately mentally turned 2. He was on the less mature side compared to some of his other predecessors. Some of the other ones were more mature and were able to do the transition a little better. Agreeable though, they did actually have a lot of trouble too. But for him it was specifically hard because he was not mentally at a point where he could have been put in the 2-year-old room in general. And then throwing this whole divorce thing in there, he got separated from the kids, from the teachers and everything. It was really hard to see. Kids that grow up in the daycare are more likely to have divorces later in life because they're taught at a young age divorce and separation, starting with the parents, moving on to every single teacher they have in every single classroom as they grow up. And just because they're automatically, by a year calendar, a year older, automatically meant that they were mature enough and physically capable enough to be moved to a separate classroom. That is how it worked. And it's wrong. It is so wrong. Just because your child is old enough for that does not mean that they can be moved. And the fact that they have to deal with separation at such a young age is heartbreaking, was heartbreaking. It was one of the hardest times of the year when the classrooms changed over and we had to move kids from kids. When it got to the older kids, when I got moved into the 3-year-old room and the same time of year rolled around, same thing but on a harder scale because those kids were old enough that they could talk, they can move, and more often than not, they would lash out because they were with a teacher that they didn't know or understand in any way, shape, or form. They were upset, reasonably so, and it was much, I wouldn't say harder, but it was just as hard with the older kids as it was with the younger kids. My third point that I'll go into is regular routines and everything. A lot of people can agree that people in general need routines, that humans are creatures of habits, okay? They have routines, they have things that they do constantly and everything. That they repeat it over and over and over again. And when you talk to people who have children, who are raising children in any way, shape, or form, or even people that are helping people raise children. I honestly think of Super Nanny with this. I've watched a fair amount of that, or I think it was Super Nanny. Yeah, Super Nanny or Nanny 911. I watched a fair bit amount of that when I was a little on the younger side. And in those videos, she would say this exact same thing that I'm going to be saying. Children need routine also. If it is consistent, if a routine is the same thing over and over, they'll be able to adapt to it in a way that fits them. They get used to it. They know what to expect. They don't get caught off guard and feel like they're being thrown into the deep end without a safety vest. Children from the age, honestly, probably from infancy up, but I know for sure 1-year-olds and up, they need the consistent regulations, whether it's consistent meals, we eat at this time, nap times. Talk to any mother who has a child. If that child misses a nap time, or that nap time gets moved either too early or too late, it messes up the entire day. Regularity and routines, they're necessary. They are important, and you're not going to get that in a daycare. I will tell you that now. When I first started writing and thinking about these sort of things, I was sick. My classroom had a substitute teacher in it. Even though her routine would have been very similar to mine, because it was all written out on paper, we all followed basically similar routines for the most part on all of this. She would have done it very differently. Her standards would have been different. Her routine itself would have been different. And because the kids didn't know her, they were not going to listen. They're going to take their time. They're going to cry because they're upset I'm not there. So the routines in general would have gotten mixed up. And if I was there in my classroom, if everything was fine, routines weren't consistent. No matter how much you try, it just didn't happen. If a kid gets dropped off too early or too late, they'll miss different parts of the routine. If they're picked up too early or too late, they miss different parts of the routine. They get subject to other parts of the routine they may not have seen before. And it's hard and it's difficult for them. If the weather is bad, as mentioned before, they're not going to go outside, which messes up with their routine. If one kid is having a hard time going down for a nap, the other kids aren't going to go down for a nap because it's too noisy, but it messes up their routine. It messes up what they're doing and how they're thinking. It's not the same thing over and over again. And in this one, I think of the super nanny. She would tell the parents and that to be consistent with the rules and the regulations and the discipline and everything. And you're not going to get that in a daycare. If nothing else, our disciplines, our rules are going to be different than what you have at your house. Every single day is going to be new and weird to them. And they're not going to be able to follow along. Even the older kids struggled with this. Swap a teacher out and it got all sorts of a mess. But even if it was a teacher that's been there for a while, that the students knew, it still caused issues. Still caused problems because all it took was for one kid to be late, one to be lagging behind, one to have a bad day, one to get picked up early, and they miss this whole set of routines. And next time when it comes around, they're going to get thrown off. They're not going to know what to expect. They get thrown into the deep end without a life jacket. The first 24 hours of working in the daycare, closer to the first 8 hours, what I took home on my first day was, why on earth would a parent do this to a child? They are put in a room with 11 other kids, one, maybe two teachers, and they're basically jostled. They're basically a number on, I would say on the wall, but in this case, it was on an iPad. They were just a number. They did not have a self-identity in a lot of ways. They often did not have one-on-one with the adults that were in their lives. They often didn't have good times or hard times. If they were having a hard time, they wouldn't get comfort or anything. It was not easy to watch a lot of the time. And the random things that I know about the families where I watch their child is disturbing, honestly. I have no right to know as much as I do about those families. There is no reason for me, a stranger, to know that much about them. Even with the 1-year-olds, I knew a lot of what was going on in their house because of the 1-year-olds. And that's a topic for another episode that I will be doing, reflection or mirroring of that. But that is a separate episode. Even to this day, I'll recognize a lot of the kiddos that were in my classes or were in my daycare in general. I will recognize them. I won't recognize the parents. I did not know the parents. Only like 1 or 2 of them did I ever learn their names. I did not know who they were. I knew who their child was. And I can almost guarantee the same thing in retrospect. They may have known my name because they may have asked the director, but I'll put money on that they didn't. they had no idea who I was. And I was the one watching their child, feeding, changing, and taking care of their children, teaching their children new things, and watching over them while they were off doing other stuff. I don't think God made a mistake when he made the family unit, when he made a mother and a father and the children. It's very, very simple. Father, mother, children. Another quick point is the socialization. I know of a family that has their toddlers, they're about 3, in a daycare because of being socialized. They're 3, okay? They don't need to be socialized. They need to be with mother. They need to be with mom, being nurtured and cared for and playing with their mom and their siblings and their father. When it comes to someone so young, and I will 100% touch more on this in episodes to follow when it comes to socializing. Again, I plan to do a video on homeschooling, and I'm going to do one on public schools as well. And I'll touch more on it, but I will tell you right now, your 1-year-old does not need to be socialized. Your 3-year-old does not need to be. And if you feel like it is a big concern, then go to your grandparents, go to your friend's house, go to your church. Go to places where you can, 1, be there to see what's going on, and 2, with a group of people you know and trust. I cannot emphasize that enough. You go and somewhere where you can watch them and being watched by people you trust. Parks, perfect. All sorts of friends I made at parks and the river and at my church. It is not necessary to be thrown into a system at such a young age just so you can be able to hang out with people. At 3, that is not your concern. As a 3-year-old, your biggest concern is to keep your pants on and know how to put your shoes on and to eat food. That is what a 3-year-old needs to be concerned about, not hanging out with other kids that they don't know. The daycares, they're so prominent in general in our society, and sorry, just hit my mic, and it's not a good thing. They are being taken at such a young age away from their parents and thrown in with strangers that they have no right to know who are in any way, shape, or form. And I need to wrap this up. I'm getting later here. And I'll touch on my last few points then. I do think that there is a place for daycares. If a family is truly down on their luck, aka if it is a single parent who is truly down on their luck, I think there is a time and a place for a daycare. But I do not think that that daycare should be done by a stranger. That daycare should be built up and brought up by your church or your family or your friends. People that you know, people that you can trust. You do not know what is happening inside the daycares. I have 2 big points for you to walk home with after watching this. One is, you do not know what is happening inside of your daycare where your child is. On a bad day with a bad teacher, they are not going to be treated right. On a good day with a good teacher, they can be neglected. They can be pushed to the side because they're not loud, because they're not causing troubles. They're the quiet kid that sits in the back corner. They're going to get ignored. They are not going to get the love and affection a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old should be getting. You don't know what happens behind those closed doors, what those children see or witness or know. Even if the teachers are trying their best to take care of them, to minister to them, to be with them, I can guarantee you that at some point or another, something happened that you should have been aware of and you didn't know, and you still don't know, and you're never going to know. The other thing, the one important other thing I want you to take away from this is very, very simple. You're not the one raising your children. I am. The teachers at your daycare are the ones raising them. I got to see first steps. I got to hear the first words. And in the older classrooms, I was the one that got to watch them discover a new thing, a new passion, or when everything clicks in place and they figure out a problem. I was the one that got to witness their bigger joys I was the one that comforted them when they were sick and waiting for mother to come pick them up. The teachers at the daycare are the ones raising your children, not you. And most of the time, that's a very scary thought because you don't know what is happening behind the closed doors of your daycare. I can I do guarantee you on that.